The incident occurred on a sunny Saturday afternoon in the quiet suburban enclave of Oak Creek, a neighborhood of manicured lawns and meticulously painted mailboxes. Dr. Franklin Hayes, a distinguished civil rights attorney with deep ties to the Department of Justice, was hosting a family barbecue in his own backyard. A noise complaint, filed by a disgruntled neighbor who had lived on the street for 30 years, brought Officer Kyler and Officer Dunn to his front door. The complaint, relayed with casual indifference by the dispatcher, cited ghetto noise and unruly behavior. What began as a routine response to a petty grievance rapidly devolved into a textbook case of racial profiling, unlawful commands, and abuse of authority, culminating in a legal firestorm that would cost the city and its police department $500,000 and Officer Kyler his career. It was a stark reminder that a badge and a bias are a toxic combination, especially when confronted by a man who had spent his life dismantling the very systems that gave them power. The smell of charcoal and marinated chicken hung in the air, a perfect scent for a warm May afternoon. Laughter from Franklin's nieces and nephews drifted from the backyard, mingling with the mellow, jazzy rhythm of a classic soul playlist. Franklin, dressed in a simple navy polo shirt and khaki shorts, was wiping his hands on a dish towel when the sharp, insistent rap on his front door cut through the pleasant atmosphere. He frowned, glancing toward the sound. His wife, Sarah, caught his eye from the kitchen entrance, a silent question on her face. He gave a small, reassuring shake of his head and walked to the door. Through the peephole, he saw the polished black boots, the navy blue trousers, and the glint of a badge. 2 police officers. He took a deep, steadying breath, a habit honed over decades of navigating a world that often saw his skin before his credentials, and opened the door. The officer on the left, younger and broader, with a tightly trimmed haircut that seemed to amplify the rigid set of his jaw, spoke first. His name tag read, "Kyler, sir, we've had a complaint about excessive noise from this residence." Officer Kyler's voice was flat, devoid of any neighborly curiosity. It was an immediate accusation. His eyes swept past Franklin, trying to peer into the house, a flicker of impatience in his gaze. The other officer, Dunn, stood a step back, his expression more neutral, almost passive. "A noise complaint?" Franklin repeated, his tone even. He kept his body positioned squarely in the doorway, not inviting them in, not backing away. "It's 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, officer. We're having a small family barbecue in the back." Kyler's lips thinned into a dismissive line. The complaint specified loud, offensive music and disruptive behavior. Said it sounded like a ghetto party. He delivered the slur with a pointed emphasis, watching Franklin's face for a reaction. It was a test, a verbal jab meant to provoke. Franklin's expression didn't change, but a cold, familiar weight settled in his stomach. He had heard that word, and others like it, weaponized in courtrooms, in police reports, and in the hushed, fearful stories of his clients. To hear it now, aimed at his own home, at his family's laughter, was like a spark on dry tinder. "The music is a collection of Motown classics, officer," Franklin said, his voice remaining dangerously calm. "My children and their cousins are playing in the yard. I can assure you there is nothing unruly happening here. Perhaps the complainant is mistaken. We're not here to debate your playlist," Kyler snapped, his patience visibly fraying. He took a half-step forward, crowding the doorway. The leather of his duty belt creaked. "We're here to tell you to shut it down. Turn the music off. Get your people under control." The phrase, "your people," hung in the air, thick and ugly. Franklin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Officer Dunn shifted his weight, a subtle sign of discomfort, but he remained silent, letting Kyler lead. This was the critical juncture, the point where compliance could be mistaken for submission, and where standing one's ground could be twisted into obstruction. Franklin knew the playbook by heart. "With all due respect, officer, I don't believe we are in violation of any city ordinance," he stated clearly. Oak Creek Municipal Code 908010 defines a noise disturbance as sound that is unreasonably loud, jarring, disturbing, or protracted during specific hours. We are well outside the restricted hours of 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., and the volume is well within the acceptable decibel level for daytime residential activity. "I am not required to shut it down," Kyler stared at him, a flicker of disbelief warring with outright anger. He wasn't used to being quoted city ordinances by someone in shorts and a polo shirt standing on their own front porch. He clearly expected either immediate compliance or a belligerent argument. This calm, factual recitation was something else entirely, and it infuriated him. "Are you a lawyer or something?" Kyler sneered, the question dripping with sarcasm. "You think you can talk your way out of this? I'm giving you a lawful order. Turn it off. Now." "It is not a lawful order if it has no legal basis," Franklin replied, his voice hardening slightly. He refused to be baited. He refused to raise his voice. He would meet this unprofessional aggression with unshakable composure. "You cannot compel me to cease an activity that is not illegal. If you wish to issue a citation, you are free to do so, and I will be happy to address it in court. Otherwise, my family and I will be returning to our barbecue." He made a slight move to close the door. Kyler's hand shot out, planting firmly on the wood, stopping it. The casual gesture of dismissal had been a final straw. "You're not closing the door on me," he growled, his face reddening. "I need to see some identification." Now, from across the street, a curtain twitched in the window of Mrs. Gable's house. A few doors down, a man who had been watering his petunias paused, hose in hand, watching the scene unfold. The public sphere was now a part of this confrontation. Franklin's gaze flickered from Kyler's hand on his door to the officer's furious eyes. The situation was escalating exactly as he had feared, following a script he had seen play out hundreds of times, often with far more tragic endings. "Officer, you have no reasonable suspicion of a crime that would compel me to provide identification," Franklin said, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "I am standing in my own home. You were called here on a frivolous and, frankly, racist complaint. You have no right to demand my papers like this is a police state." Kyler's partner, Dunn, finally spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Kyler, maybe we just give him a warning. The music isn't that loud from here," but Kyler wasn't listening. He saw Franklin's calm refusal not as a statement of rights, but as a direct challenge to his authority. And in his world, his authority was absolute. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Kyler said, his voice low and menacing. He let his hand drop from the door, but it hovered near his side, a silent, practiced threat. "Talking about ordinances and rights. We get guys like you all the time. Think they know better than us. Let me tell you how this works. You either give me your ID, or I'm going to pull you out of this house, and you'll be charged with obstruction of justice. Your choice." The threat was plain, brutal, and entirely illegal. Franklin felt a surge of cold anger, but his expression remained a mask of placid control. He had counseled countless young men on how to survive this exact moment. De-escalate, do not resist, remember every detail. But he was not a frightened teenager on a street corner. He was a man in his own home, a protector of the very laws this officer was now threatening to shred. He made a decision. He would not de-escalate. He would educate. Obstruction of justice, Officer Kyler, under this state's penal code, requires knowingly impeding an officer in the lawful execution of their duties, Franklin began, his voice taking on the precise, lecturing cadence of a law professor. "As your demand for my identification is not predicated on reasonable, articulable suspicion of criminal activity, it is not a lawful duty. Therefore, my refusal to comply cannot constitute obstruction. In fact, your threat to physically remove me from my home under these circumstances could be construed as aggravated assault and a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure." Kyler's face, which had been flushed with anger, now began to pale with confusion. The legal jargon was hitting him like a series of rapid-fire punches, and he didn't know how to block. He looked at Dunn, who offered a helpless shrug, his eyes wide. The man watering his flowers had now taken out his phone and was discreetly recording. Another neighbor on their evening walk had stopped, phone also raised. The audience was growing. "You can spout whatever nonsense you want," Kyler stammered, his bravado cracking. "I am the law here. You're going to learn some respect." He took another aggressive step forward, placing his foot on the threshold of the front door, a clear intent to enter. The air crackled. This was the line. Franklin didn't move back. Instead, he held up a hand, a gesture that was both a stop sign and a plea for calm. "Officer, I am going to give you one final opportunity to reconsider your course of action," he said, his voice resonating with a new, profound authority. "You are about to make a mistake that will have severe, career-altering consequences. You are attempting to unlawfully enter my private residence without a warrant, exigent circumstances, or consent. You have threatened me with a baseless arrest. All of this, in response to a discriminatory complaint that you, yourself, repeated and validated. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Kyler hesitated, his foot still on the threshold, trapped between his wounded pride and a dawning sense of dread. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he finally spat out, a desperate, last-ditch effort to reclaim dominance. Franklin met his gaze. The mask of simple homeowner fell away, replaced by the steely resolve of a man who had faced down hostile judges, corrupt prosecutors, and prejudiced systems for his entire adult life. "That's an excellent question, Officer Kyler. Let me answer it for you." Franklin reached not for his wallet, but for his phone. With a few quick taps, he brought up a digital ID. Then, slowly and deliberately, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet, flipping it open to a specific credential. He held both out for the officers to see. "I am Dr. Franklin Hayes," he said, his voice ringing with clarity. On the phone screen was his State Bar Association card, complete with his photo and bar number. In his wallet, nestled beside his driver's license, was a laminated identification card. It had his name, his photograph, and the unmistakable seal of the United States Department of Justice. Below his name, the title was printed in bold, black letters: Senior Counsel, Civil Rights Division Advisory Committee. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Officer Kyler's eyes darted from the bar card to the DOJ credential and back again. The color drained completely from his face, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. His foot, which had been so aggressively planted on the threshold of Franklin's home, slid back as if the floor had suddenly become red hot. He physically recoiled, taking a full step back onto the porch. Officer Dunn's eyes were wide with sheer panic. He took a half step away from his partner, a subconscious act of disassociation. He looked from the credentials to Franklin's unyielding face, and then to the neighbors who were now openly recording, their phones like small, unblinking eyes of judgment. The silence stretched, thick with the officer's dawning horror. The cheerful sounds of the barbecue, the music, the laughter, seemed to mock the tableau of humiliation unfolding on the front porch. I didn't," Kyler stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. The aggressive certainty was gone, replaced by the frantic backtracking of a man who suddenly realized he had walked off a cliff. "Sir, we were just responding to a call. We didn't know." Franklin slowly lowered his credentials, his gaze like granite. "You didn't know?" he repeated, the words dripping with cold irony. "Does my profession determine my right to be treated with dignity in my own home? Would you have acted differently if I were a plumber? A teacher? Or does a black man in shorts only deserve respect when he can produce a Justice Department ID? Your conduct had nothing to do with who I am, officer. It had everything to do with who you thought I was." He let the accusation hang in the air. He then turned his steely gaze to Officer Dunn, who flinched. "And you," Franklin said, his voice cutting. "You stood by. You watched your partner violate policy and threaten a citizen with illegal acts, and you said nothing of substance. Your silence is complicity." Remember that during the internal affairs investigation, Dunn visibly swallowed, his atoms apple bobbing. He looked like he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him. Kyler, meanwhile, was fumbling for his radio, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip it. "Dispatch. Send a supervisor to this location. 1214 Oak Street." His voice was strained, cracking with panic. "There's no need to call for a supervisor, Officer Kyler," Franklin said calmly. "I already have his direct number. In fact, I have the chief's number as well. We served on a police reform task force together last year. I believe Sergeant Peterson is the watch commander today, isn't he?" The mention of the chief's name, and the casual reference to a shared task force, was the final nail in the coffin. Kyler looked utterly broken. He had not just profiled and threatened a citizen. He had done it to one of the most legally formidable men in the state, a man who had direct lines of communication to the highest levels of his own department. Franklin stepped back into his home and retrieved his own phone again. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed a number. "Sergeant Peterson, please. This is Franklin Hayes." He paused, listening. "Frank, good to hear from you." though I suspect this isn't a social call. Yes, I'm at my home. I've just had a rather troubling interaction with two of your officers, Kyler and Dunn. Yes, they're right here. He held the phone out. The sergeant would like a word with you. Officer Kyler. Kyler's hand trembled as he took the phone. He held it to his ear, his back rigid. Yes, Sergeant. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. His responses were clipped, deferential, a universe away from the snarling aggression of moments before. He handed the phone back to Franklin, his eyes fixed on the ground, unable to meet Franklin's gaze. The quiet hum of the neighborhood was now punctuated by the distant but approaching wail of a siren. Sergeant Peterson was coming, and he was coming fast. The barbecue was over. The legal battle was just beginning. Sergeant Peterson's patrol car arrived without the frantic urgency of its siren, which he had cut a block away. He parked and emerged from the vehicle with the weary posture of a man who knew he was walking into a disaster. He was older than Kyler, with graying temples and a face etched with the lines of bureaucratic stress. He saw Franklin standing in his doorway, the two junior officers standing stiffly on the lawn like scolded children, and the small crowd of phone-wielding neighbors. Peterson's eyes met Franklin's, and he gave a short, grim nod of acknowledgement. "Frank," he said, his voice low as he approached the porch. "What happened here?" Before Franklin could answer, Kyler stepped forward, his face a mess of desperation and fear. "Sarge, it was a misunderstanding. We got a bad call, a noise complaint. The information we were given was inflammatory. We were just following procedure." Franklin let out a short, mirthless laugh. "Procedure? Is it procedure to validate a racist complaint by repeating its slurs? Is it procedure to threaten a citizen with unlawful arrest for refusing to present an ID you have no right to demand? Is it procedure, Sergeant, to attempt to force your way into a private residence without a warrant?" Peterson's face hardened as he turned to Kyler. "Did you place your foot on his threshold?" Kyler's silence was his confession. Peterson's jaw clenched. He looked back at Franklin. "Frank, on behalf of the department, I sincerely apologize. This is not how we train our officers. This conduct is unacceptable. Your apology is noted, Bill. But it is not accepted," Franklin said, his voice firm. "This isn't about a simple misunderstanding or a breach of etiquette. This is about systemic bias. Your officer arrived at my home with a preconceived narrative, one fed by a complaint he should have recognized as prejudiced on its face. He saw a black man, heard soul music, and his brain filled in the rest with ghetto and unruly. He saw my refusal to be intimidated not as an assertion of my rights, but as a challenge to his dominance. This wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. A choice he made based on my race." He gestured to the neighbors. "And it was all witnessed. It was all recorded. The body cameras your officers are wearing will corroborate their illegal threats, and my consistent, calm recitation of the law." Kyler and Dunn both seemed to shrink, as if just remembering the small black boxes attached to their chests, recording every word, every sneer, every threat. Peterson ran a hand over his face. "I will be taking their statements. I'll be reviewing all the footage personally. Officer Kyler and Officer Dunn will be placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a full internal affairs investigation." "That's a good first step," Franklin acknowledged. "But it's not the last. This goes beyond an internal review. There will be a civil suit. Not for my own enrichment. Any settlement or award will be donated directly to the Legal Aid Society's Police Accountability Project. This will be a public lesson, Bill. A lesson about consequences. A lesson that the shield of qualified immunity is not impenetrable, especially when conduct is so egregiously outside the bounds of the law." The neighbor who had made the initial call, a woman named Carol, was now peering from her window, the blinds pulled back just enough to reveal her horrified face. She had seen the supervisor arrive, had seen the deference shown to Franklin. She was beginning to understand that her casual, prejudiced complaint had ignited a fire she could not control. Franklin's family had gathered in the hallway behind him, drawn by the cessation of music and the tense silence. Sarah placed a hand on his back, her touch a source of silent strength. His son, a teenager, watched with wide, angry eyes, seeing firsthand the lessons his father had tried to teach him about the world. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The bodycam footage, obtained through a discovery request from Franklin's legal team, was damning. It showed Kyler's escalating aggression, his sneering use of the word ghetto, his unlawful commands, and his partner's passive complicity. Combined with the crystal-clear videos from the neighbors' phones, it created an undeniable narrative of racial bias and abuse of power. The story was picked up by the local news, then national outlets. The headline was irresistible. DOJ advisor and civil rights attorney profiled and threatened by cops at his own family barbecue. Officer Kyler became the face of modern policing's deepest flaws. He was fired within a month, the police union offering only a token defense before quietly abandoning his case as unwinnable. Officer Dunn received a lengthy suspension and was permanently reassigned to a desk job, his career on the street effectively over. The city, facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence and the legal prowess of Dr. Franklin Hayes, chose not to fight. They settled the lawsuit for $500,000, the maximum their insurance would allow, without a protracted court battle. As promised, Franklin signed the entire sum over to a foundation he had helped establish, which provided pro bono legal services to victims of police misconduct who didn't have a DOJ credential in their wallet. The neighbor, Carol, became a pariah on her own street. Her casual act of bigotry had been exposed. Some neighbors gave her the silent treatment. Others openly confronted her. For sale signs began to feel inevitable. One evening, weeks later, Franklin stood on his porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The neighborhood was quiet again. The incident had left a scar, a lingering tension beneath the suburban peace. It was a vindication, but a hollow one. He had won. The system, in this rare instance, had been forced to correct itself. But his victory was born of a privilege most did not possess. He thought of the countless others, the young men and women who couldn't quote penal codes, who didn't have the chief of police on speed dial, whose encounters with an officer like Kyler ended not with a lawsuit, but with handcuffs, a false charge, or worse. The fight wasn't just about winning his own battle. It was about changing the very nature of the war. His phone buzzed. It was a message from the director of the Legal Aid Foundation. The first grant funded by the city's settlement had just been approved. It was for the case of a young woman who had been illegally searched and arrested on her way home from her night shift job. Her public defender had been about to advise her to take a plea deal. Now, she would have a real defense. A small smile touched Franklin's lips. It wasn't a full victory, not yet. But it was a start. The barbecue had been ruined, but its embers had lit a new fire.